Keshrim Boztaev was born on June 25, 1933, in the village of Akshatau, August district, Semipalatinsk region, in an ordinary rural family. His father, Boztaev, worked as a village blacksmith, and his mother, Balkhia, was a housewife who raised children and looked after the household and livestock. From a young age, Keshrim learned the hard work of the villagers, helping his father and mother. Keshrim's father, Boztaev, was a nobleman. In 1944, during the war, repressed Chechens from the Caucasus were exiled to Kazakhstan. Father Boztaev saved the Chechen family by providing them with work, shelter, and food. The eldest of the Chechens was called Husayn. Boztaev died in the autumn of 1959 at the age of 63. In the spring of 1960, a large delegation of Chechens headed by Husayn arrived in the village of Akshatau, but did not find Boztaev alive. In memory and gratitude to Boztaev and his family, the Chechens built a large monument of adobe bricks on his grave. After graduating from the Kazakh Mining and Metallurgic Institute in 1956 in Alma-Ata, Keshrim Boztaev worked for 12 years at the Ust-Kasenogorsk lead and zinc works, one of the largest industrial complexes in the former Soviet Union. He began his professional activity at the plant as an ordinary smelter and completed it as top manager. Keshrim was hardworking and talented. He earned the respect and recognition of his fellow workers. Keshrim made several rationalization proposals and inventions to improve the metallurgical process. Boztaev was awarded the title of Honored Innovator of the Kazakh SSR for innovative activity. Boztaev's political career began in 1968 with his appointment to the high position of the head of the leading Communist Party Committee of the Ust-Kasenogorsk lead and zinc works, the flagship of the non-ferrous metallurgy of Kazakhstan. In 1973, Boztaev was appointed to the highest governing body of the East Kazakhstan Regional Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, CPSU, where he held the position of the deputy governor of the Eastern Kazakhstan region. During his activity in the Regional Committee of the Communist Party, Boztaev made a great contribution to the industrial development of the East Kazakhstan region. In 1987, Keshrim Boztaev was appointed as the head of the Eastern Kazakhstan region, the first secretary of the Semipalatinsk Regional Committee of the CPSU. The Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, with total area of 18,500 square meters, the world's largest nuclear test site, was located on the territory of the region. The Polygon was founded in 1947. After the end of World War II in 1945, after the victory over Nazi Germany, the USSR and the USA turned from allies into rivals. The American elite was dissatisfied with the terms of the Yalta Agreements on the division of spheres of influence in Europe, concluded between the USSR and the USA. In August 1945, in order to hasten the surrender of Japan, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed. After the bombing, by order of President Truman, who was horrified by the consequences of the death of civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bomber plane with the 3rd atomic bomb was returned to the American base. Another purpose of the bombings was the intention of the United States to intimidate the world with the presence of the most terrible and destructive weapons in the history of mankind. Many regretted the bombings. Thus, the Vatican immediately condemned the bombings, calling the use of atomic bombs brutal and disgusting, the heaviest blow to Christian civilization and the laws of morality. On March 5, 1946, in Fulton, Missouri, USA, Winston Churchill delivered his famous speech about the confrontation between the West and the East and the need to deter the USSR. Churchill stated that an iron curtain had fallen over the world. The world was divided into two camps, the American world, Pax Americana, and the communist one. On March 12, 1947, a new U.S. military political doctrine was announced, the Truman Doctrine, designed to actively prevent the spread of communism. The Cold War began, bringing the threat of atomic bombings of the cities of the Soviet Union. In 1947, the Government Commission of the USSR decided to create a nuclear test site on the territory of the Semipalatinsk region as the most suitable place for testing. Located in the steppe plain surrounded by mountains with a low population density, proximity to railways, the city of Semipalatinsk, water resources, the river Irtysh. On August 29, 1949, the first Soviet atomic bomb with a capacity of 22 kilotons was tested at the Semipalatinsk test site. This test of the first Soviet atomic bomb marked the end of the U.S. nuclear monopoly and the start of a nuclear arms race between the two superpowers. From 1949 to 1963, open, ground, and air tests were carried out at the Semipalatinsk test site at the experimental field site. These were the most dangerous tests for the health of people living near the landfill. In total, 456 nuclear tests were conducted at the Semipalatinsk test site, ground, air, and underground. Underground tests were carried out from 1963 to 1989 at the Degelen and Balapan sites. During this time, the population of the Semipalatinsk region adjacent to the test site had almost tripled. People of different nationalities lived in the areas adjacent to the landfill: Kazakhs, Russians, Ukrainians, Germans. Tens of thousands of people suffered from the consequences of the tests. Hundreds of thousands were affected by nuclear tests, including local residents living near the test site, as well as the military, participants in the nuclear tests. People began to get sick with various serious diseases, and the mortality rate of the population increased sharply. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, with his new appointment as the Secretary General of the Central Committee of the CPSU, launched a new policy of glasnost and perestroika that led to a détente between the two superpowers. In 1987, Keshrim Boztaev, having arrived in Semipalatinsk as the head of the region, drew attention to the difficult social situation of the population of the region affected by nuclear tests. On the initiative of Keshrim Boztaev, the government of the USSR adopted a resolution on accelerating the socio-economic development of the Semipalatinsk region of the Kazakh SSSR, dated October 4th, 1988. The government of the USSR allocated 5 billion rubles. However, due to the collapse of the USSR and the subsequent economic crisis in the country, the Semipalatinsk region received only 960 million rubles, a huge amount at that time. However, it was a big win. On February 12, 1989, another underground nuclear explosion thundered at the Semipalatinsk test site. There was an outflow of radioactive gases, the so-called noble gases, xenon, krypton, argon, and others with a half-life of several days, to the surface of the Earth. A cloud of gases covered the village of Chagan, located 40 kilometers from the explosion site. The 79th Strategic Aviation Division, independent of the leadership of the Semipalatinsk training ground, was stationed there. This division was armed with heavy bombers, Tu-95 MS-16. Tu-95 MSB, according to the Western classification, Bear. Kh-55 cruise missiles with nuclear warheads range 3,000 kilometers. These bombers patrolled, carried out reconnaissance and detection of the surface fleet and submarines of a potential enemy in the Pacific Ocean up to the U.S. West Coast, California. Military experts on nuclear background dosimetry recorded an excess of radiation background up to 3,500 to 4,000 microroentgen per hour, which exceeded the norm by 200 times. The division commander, Major General Pavel Bredikhin, concerned about the consequences of the tests for the population, informed the leadership of the Air Forces of the Republic, as well as the first secretary of the Semipalatinsk Regional Committee of the party, Boztaev, about this incident. Keshrim Boztaev had the right to communicate directly with the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU, Mikhail Gorbachev. On February 20th, 1989, Boztaev decided to send a cipher telegram, marked top secret, to Moscow to the General Secretary of the CPSU, Mikhail Gorbachev, demanding a reduction in the frequency of tests and transfer of tests to another location, with the subsequent cessation of tests at the Semipalatinsk test site. Keshrim Boztaev, being a convinced communist, spoke out against the existing arms race system, believing that the buildup of nuclear arsenals between the two nuclear superpowers threatening a nuclear apocalypse had exhausted itself. In his book, Semipalatinsk Test Site, Keshrim Boztaev writes, "Nuclear parity has been achieved today. The further race is an endless run in a vicious circle, going nowhere. It is very dangerous because in a closed space, there is an accumulation of energy of destruction. The very ideology of nuclear parity has become no less dangerous than the atomic bomb." Members of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the CPSU were familiarized with the telegram, and it sounded in the military-industrial complex, like an explosion from the blue. 2 days later, the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Kazakh SSSR, Gennady Kolbin, called Boztaev and said, "Your telegram got to Mikhail Gorbachev. He had a conversation with Defense Minister Dmitry Yazov, who said that Boztaev is escalating the situation. The training ground is clean. There are no grounds for anxiety." In the book, Semipalatinsk Test Site, Boztaev writes, "It became clear to me that with this cipher telegram, I opened the way to an unpredictable future. The road of confrontation turned out to be not only thorny, but also dangerous, fraught with many troubles." According to MEP Strawn Stevenson, a descendant of the great English writer of the 18th century Robert Louis Stevenson, I think most people should know what role Keshrim Boztaev played in closing the landfill. It was the most secret facility in the Soviet Union. In this case, the statement about the situation at the test site was a step of incredible courage, which is that he sent a secret telegram to Mikhail Gorbachev demanding that the test site be closed. This telegram is a historical document for the 20th century and possibly for the 21st century. We should not forget about the legacy left by Keshrim Boztaev. It was a great contribution to the cause of peace. On February 22, 1989, the Bureau of the Semipalatinsk Regional Party Committee submitted a request to the Council of Ministers of the USSR to stop nuclear testing. On February 28, 1989, on the instructions of Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU, a government commission arrived in Kazakhstan from Moscow to investigate issues related to the cipher telegram of Keshrim Boztaev, dated February 20, 1989. On February 28, 1989, the public of Kazakhstan decided to create the anti-nuclear movement Nevada Semipalatinsk. The well-known Kazakh poet Olja Suleymanov became its leader. Keshrim Boztaev supported the movement. In his book, Semipalatinsk Test Site, Keshrim Boztaev writes that in March 1989, the chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, asked him to support Olja Suleimanov in his nomination to the People's Deputies of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR from the August district of the Semipalatinsk region, substantiating this request by that Suleimanov will help you. In his face you will find good support in the anti-Polygon movement. The same request was made by the first secretary of the Communist Party of Kazakhstan, Gennady Kolbin. It should be noted that the movement Nevada Semipalatinsk was organized and supported by the leadership of Kazakhstan. Keshrim Boztaev supported the candidacy of Olja Suleimanov for his nomination as the People's Deputy of the USSR from the August region. Subsequently, the regional committee of the party gave permission to the Nevada Semipalatinsk movement to hold rallies in the territory of the Semipalatinsk region, allocating people from budget organizations to participate in the rallies, allocating transport for the rallies, as well as the resources of the regional television and radio broadcasting complex. On March 1st, 1989, the government of the Kazakh SSR approved the Republican Commission for monitoring the state of the ecological situation in the area of the test site of the Semipalatinsk region. Regional and Republican authorities took control of the situation at the Semipalatinsk test site. The danger and senselessness of the arms race was obvious. So many atomic weapons were created that could destroy the entire planet many times over. To cause irreparable damage to the planet, it was only necessary to release about 100 nuclear charges, which is less than 2% of the total volume of existing nuclear warheads for all types of weapons, the so-called triad: intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear submarine fleet, strategic bombers, about 10,000 nuclear weapons with each side, the USSR and the USA, data from 1991. Indeed, in 1962 there was a Caribbean crisis. The world was on the verge of an apocalypse. There was a real threat of nuclear war. Keshrim Boztaev belonged to the highest party nomenclature, which included members of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the CPSU, first secretaries of the regional and regional committees of the party, about 200 people in total, in whose hands was all the political power in the country. Keshrim Boztaev was the People's Deputy of the USSR, 1889 to 1991, a member of the Defense and State Security Committee of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, 1989 to 1991. Starting from the first cipher telegram, Keshrim Boztaev for 2.5 years persistently and consistently fought for the termination of tests and the closure of the Semipalatinsk test site. Despite the opposition of the military-industrial complex of the USSR Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, Nuclear Industry, which advocated the continuation of testing. Now few people know that this department had huge financial and material resources. In fact, it was the second government in the Soviet Union, and few dared to oppose the interests of this department. From the moment the cipher telegram was sent, an unofficial company of pressure on Boztaev from the side of the military-industrial complex began. These 2.5 years of confrontation were the most difficult in Boztaev's life, which required considerable civil courage. The chairman of the Kurchatov City Executive Committee, Yevgeny Chaikovsky, recalled that in the offices of the military-industrial complex, Boztaev was called the first person who rebelled against the generals, a dangerous person, a grave digger of a nuclear test site. At the insistence of Keshrim Boztaev, the affected residents of the region were examined and treated. During his work in Semipalatinsk, 22 medical centers were put into operation, including 5 diagnostic medical centers, diagnostic, eye, kidney, maternal and child health services, and children's health centers. The government of the USSR provided assistance to the Semipalatinsk region in the amount of 960 million rubles. Industrial facilities and apartment buildings were built for the city. On the initiative of Keshrim Boztaev, on July 17th to 19th, 1989, the first all-union scientific and practical conference, Health of the Population and the Ecological Situation in the City of Semipalatinsk and the Semipalatinsk region of the Kazakh SSSR, was held in the city of Semipalatinsk. For the first time, documents about the terrible consequences of nuclear tests on the environment and public health were presented to the world. Keshrim Boztaev raised the issue before the Military Industrial Commission, the USSR Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, Nuclear Industry, about declassifying materials on the radiation consequences of nuclear tests and transferring this information to Kazakhstan. In addition, he raised the issue of financial assistance to the Semipalatinsk test site region and improvement socioeconomic conditions of the population. He also insisted on the creation and operational work of a special commission to assess the radio-ecological situation and the health status of the inhabitants of the region. As a result of the work of the Government Commission, these decisions were made. On August 29, 1991, by the decree of the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, the Semipalatinsk test site was closed. Kazakhstan has fulfilled its historic mission to create a strategic nuclear parity between the USSR and the USA. The Semipalatinsk test site, a complex of research institutes and laboratories, was the most secret object of the Soviet Union. Keshrim Boztaev hoped that after the cessation of nuclear testing, the test site would pass under the jurisdiction of Kazakhstan, with subsequent rotation of Russian specialists to Kazakh ones, that the test site would work for the scientific development of Kazakhstan. In December 1991, under the influence of powerful external and internal factors, the Soviet Union collapsed. The world's first state of workers and peasants ceased to exist. The world has become unipolar in the face of the largest superpower, the United States. Keshrim Boztaev's book, The Semipalatinsk Test Site, designed in a strict documentary style, was published in Kazakhstan in 1992, 1994, 2006, in Kazakh and Russian. In 1992, individual chapters of the book were published in the West German magazine Spiegel in German, with the comment, Keshrim Boztaev is a former party leader, a cunning strategist. The book is still popular all over the world and is a bestseller, having contributed to world documentaries, the history of nuclear tests at the Semipalatinsk test site. The book is stored in the U.S. Library of Congress. The book has been translated into Chinese and is planned to be published in China. In 1994, the second book was published, Kaynar Syndrome. In 1996, Keshrim Boztaev, together with well-known public figures of Kazakhstan, created the public charitable foundation Polygon-August 29th, which deals with the rehabilitation of the population affected by nuclear tests. In 1998, Keshrim Boztaev published the third book on the history of the Semipalatinsk test site, August 29. In 1999, this book was published in Japan in Japanese. According to the memoirs of Colonel Anatoly Matushenko, who conducted nuclear weapons tests, the book Semipalatinsk Test Site was a reference book for many military personnel involved in nuclear weapons testing. His biography, Second Secretary of the East Kazakhstan Regional Committee of the Party, 1973 to 85, Chairman of the East Kazakhstan Regional Executive Committee, 1985 to 87, First Secretary of the Semipalatinsk Regional Committee of the Communist Party of Kazakhstan, 1987 to 91, Chairman of the Semipalatinsk Regional Council of People's Deputies, 1990 to 93, Member of the Supreme Council of the Kazakh SSSR of the 11th Convocation, Member of the Interdepartmental Government Commission of the Republic of Kazakhstan for the Semipalatinsk region. Keshrim Boztaev was awarded the Order of the Red Banner of Labor 3 times, medals, certificates of honor, diplomas of the Supreme Council of Kazakhstan, honored worker of the Republic of Kazakhstan, author of the books From the First Fire to the Atom, 1956, the fantasy novel The Girl from the Planet Deneb, 1967, experience in the integrated use of raw materials at the Ust-Kasenogorsk lead-zinc plant, 1972. Semipalatinsk test site, 1992, republished in 2006. Kaynar syndrome, 1995. Polygon-August 29, 1998, published in Japan. Active academician of the Academy for the Study of National Security Problems, Moscow, since 1997. Honorary citizen of Semipalatinsk, honorary professor of the Semipalatinsk Medical Academy. Keshrim Boztaev made a great contribution to the development of industry in the East Kazakhstan and Semipalatinsk regions. During his leadership, the Semipalatinsk region has dramatically improved its economic performance, rising from 15th place to 5th place in the ranking of Kazakhstan. Thanks to Keshrim Boztaev, 5 medical centers were launched in Semipalatinsk: diagnostic, eye, kidney, maternal and child health services, and children's health centers. Tens of thousands of people were examined and treated in them. Keshrim Boztaev, for the first time in the world, created a system of social protection of the population affected by nuclear tests. The author and initiator of the Law of the Republic of Kazakhstan, adopted by the Parliament of the Republic of Kazakhstan on December 18, 1992, on the social protection of citizens affected by nuclear tests at the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. According to this law, residents of the affected areas received monetary compensation. Women received the right to retire at 45 to 50 years old, men at 50 to 55 years old. Keshrim Boztaev is the author of the Republican Program for the Medical Rehabilitation of the Population Affected by Nuclear Tests, supported by the Government of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Decree of the Government of the Republic of Kazakhstan. The fund was one of the initiators of 52 and 53 resolutions adopted at the sessions of the UN General Assembly in 1997 to 1998. In 2002, the fund received consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, becoming an international organization. This is a high status, having the right to vote at all UN events. His son Nurlan and his daughter Janat continue the work of their father. The daughter of Keshrim Boztaev, Janat Jakieva, PhD, honored worker of the Diplomatic Service of the Republic of Kazakhstan, veteran of the Diplomatic Service of the Republic of Kazakhstan, takes an active part in the work of the foundation. She prepared the foundation's application for a UN ECOSOC consultative status, translated Keshrim Boztaev's book Semipalatinsk Polygon into English, translates documentaries and foundation documents into English. Keshrim Boztaev loved life, loved people, and was always for peace and understanding between peoples all over the world. The world should know and remember this wonderful person who left a deep mark on this earth.